to More Creative. I'm your host, Ashley Wiley, and today we talk with Louis Gonzales, a storyboard artist turned Spark short director for Pixar Animation Studios. Throughout our conversation, we learn about Louis' early love for storytelling and drawing. We talk about his work in graffiti and the opportunities that led him into animation at Warner Brothers, and then on to Pixar, working on movies such as The Incredibles, Monsters, Inc., Ratatouille, and more. It was so cool to hear about Louis' story and how his love for drawing and storytelling has spanned his entire career so far. I hope y'all enjoy this one. Louis, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So, as a kid, growing up in Southern California and loving to draw, how did your career begin?
Timing and luck is such a huge thing, I think, in life. It's good to be prepared, for when luck strikes, because luck strikes everybody, but not everyone's prepared, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is where they are thanks to other people.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't go to college. I didn't go to art school. But I did meet a guy in a comic book store named Johan. So I'm like a graffiti artist. I know I want to draw for a living, and it's just after high school. And I'm trying to hustle up airbrushing, trying to use spray paint to like do art, art for storefronts, design T-shirts. It was just the hustle to try and draw for a living, and that hustle was great. But you don't make a lot of money. It won't really. You can't provide. You can't make a life on that because you're by hook or crook, and you're basically starting out. But I wanted to be a comic artist 'cause I felt like maybe that was a stable job. So I met this guy named Johan at a comic book store, right? King's Comics in Burbank, California. And I'd gone to that comic store a lot. It was a family business, and the dad and the son who ran it there, they were super cool guys. I used to go in there just to chop it up with them sometimes. And I remember one time they're like, "Hey, this guy Johan, you draw Louis, right? There's this guy Johan, blah 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 blah." Cut to me with my portfolio showing Johan my work, and he's saying, "Oh, I'm going to run this little like mentorship kind of workshop thing in the back of this comic store." And I said, "Okay, yeah, shoot, I can't afford college. I tried. I need to get some sort of scholarship or something, so I get an art center." Animation actually wasn't in what I wanted to do. It was actually I wanted to be a comic artist, so I thought illustration would be the way. So I wanted to get into art center, but that's it. Those schools are so expensive, and so I couldn't afford, and I didn't receive the scholarship. Let's face it, I didn't really do well in high school. You know what I mean? I graduated, but I wasn't as dedicated to my studies as I am to like drawing. So I get into this. He says, "Yeah, come on in. We're gonna do this on Saturdays." Bang, I'm in there every Saturday. I'm like, "Oh, okay, what's this fool about? I don't know who this guy is really." So I'm trying to suss him out, and I'm gonna go give it one try and see what it is. I'm not really the most trusting guy, especially back then. And so I meet him, and his wife's a part of it, and there was 5 or 6 other people. For whatever reason, it just seemed like we all kind of had the same vibe. You know what I mean? We're all kind of excited to try and learn. And this guy Johan worked at Disney feature. He was a layout artist, right? And so he was just very outright, and he didn't charge us money, and he would bring in models. He had books. I mean, he was an incredible help. So whenever you hear me say I didn't go to college, I would say that, yes, I didn't go to college, but it doesn't mean I did it by myself. And I don't think that anything we do is by ourselves completely. I just don't know how that works. I think it's a great story. There's these narratives that we concoct that we want to make people seem even better than they are, But oftentimes, if you look back enough, it's like, no, they were ready for the opportunities they got at a younger age than you. That's all it was. It's a matter of timing again. We'd like to go, "Oh, they're just so gifted. They're so naturally gifted." And there is a bit of gift in it. But if someone knows young enough, kind of like they kind of have something that they can own that they love to do day in, day out, that's the most special thing because most people don't have that. They don't know what to do day in and day out. So I think a big proponent of like being talented is like being able to recognize very young, not like lightning round. Tell me what you love for you could do every day. Like who's going to answer that? It's just something you have to innately do, right? Something that you driven to do. I was driven to draw every day. You know what I mean? It doesn't make me more talented than anybody else. The thing that made me kind of help me get to where I am is that most of the people that I was around, I had friends that drew. I wasn't the good one. I was the one that was, I did it a lot, but I was nowhere near like I grew up around and had friends that were way more talented than me. Like most of the guys that I would hang out with that were in the graffiti crews, way more talented than me, I think. The thing I could only say that I had was that I felt like there was something there. Something compelled me every day to draw. and I loved doing it. I didn't ha no one had to tell me to do it. It was just something I did, and I never questioned it. But my mom and my dad were very supportive, and they tried. They would try and get me little lessons here and there, like a summer, like a like I remember one year when I was really young, they were like, my mom was like, yeah, you can go to this, community center art class during the summer. I kind of think it was her way of getting me out of the house, or like, not to paint it negative. I actually think that she did support me. They supported me. And it was a beautiful thing because like they were trying to like find something to help me. And I've always appreciated that because, that's not an easy thing to do. And I think that, like I said, you just don't do this stuff alone. You can't.
Wow. So, when did you get started with graffiti? What age were you?
Oh, that was probably in middle school. You know what I mean? Like hip hop, was a big thing, at least for me when I like beginning of middle school. You know what I mean? When you start taking stuff around, you know what I mean? Like the things around you. Middle school is that good time where you like see older kids and you want to emulate them, but then you also kind of want your own identity. And hip hop was a big part of that for me. And so like as a middle schooler, it was like I was drawing. Hip hop was like music, but it also had these like really cool like graffiti was a thing with that was a part of this music that I liked. So it was like this beautiful marriage between like the music that I liked and drawing. So it was kind of like, oh, I'm gonna start like doing graffiti. Like I'm gonna do whatever my version of graffiti is. You know what I mean? Because I didn't have anyone around me at the time that liked it. But as soon as I started doing it, and other friends started like seeing it, it was like then you started meeting other people around town or like friends of friends that did graffiti as well. Because people are like, oh, you like graffiti? Well, this other friend of mine likes graffiti. Why don't you get we should all link up and like hang out. So of course you do as a kid because you want to hang out, and it was something that I found that was fun. It kind of helped give me some sort of shape, some sort of identity for me when I was in middle school. It felt right. And with graffiti, why has it stuck around? Why is it still around? Right? And that's because it's the one way that people that don't have a lot of representation, out and about in the world, there was nothing better than like seeing your name up and people going, "Oh, damn, I saw you on the freeway." Not me personally, but like my name or like say I did a piece in the wash, like in the LA River. "Oh, damn, I saw that piece you did." It was always like, people in your community, your circle. So like graffiti was a big circle, right? You may not be in the same crew as other people, but your crew is your brand. Are you a rough and tumble crew? Are you the artistic crew? Like, what is the makeup and what do you guys represent? Like, you may not be on the whole like voting and like having team meetings to go like, what do we represent as a graffiti crew? That's not how it works, right? You guys are just all trying to get in and find your way, but you're all young and adventurous and have this desire to kind of both get noticed, get your team, your crew noticed, and still like that's through nonviolent actions, right? It's not like I want to get my crew noticed by going and picking fights and being the toughest guy. I want to get my crew noticed by being artistic, and that's why I always love graffiti is because it was always about the art. I mean, I can't tell you how many days. Most of the time, we didn't paint all the time. We would sit and sit there and draw. We'd go hang out at someone's house. It was a lot of sharing and trading and celebrating of what you were together. Now, there was also the other side of it that, at the time that we're doing this in the 90s, in LA specifically, there was a lot of like, gang stuff. You know what I mean? Like every corner had a gang and the gang culture was huge, huge then. And so as graffiti artists, like we were always running around kind of at the risk of getting robbed or, by being on the wrong territory or whatever, you know what I mean? So it was kind of nice to have that sense of camaraderie and crew without the turf or the identity of a certain street. You know what I mean? Because it was all about art. Our identity was art. Our identity was like having a good time, enjoying each other's company, sharing what we know with each other, and supporting each other basically. So graffiti to me was like a huge thing because that to me is directly in line with animation. Like it's kind of the same thing except graffiti was more pure, to be honest. Like it was just people that love doing something, clicking together and trying to do what we could with the time we had.
It's such an incredible experience you had growing up, and the fact that that translated so well with what you wanted to do in your future with animation. That's just awesome.
So here's another interesting tidbit about graffiti that I found as I've gotten older
Yeah.
and why I make the link to animation is because I didn't realize that at the time. Again, I didn't do it by myself, right? Everybody that was in the crew influenced me and helped me, whether indirectly or directly, to grow as an artist. And here's the thing that I loved about graffiti that I find now when I look back, I just feel like I was kind of blessed to be a part of it, which is the the thing about art and a collective of artists is that it's almost impossible to make it one gender, one culture, one race, whatever. It's impossible. Art is probably one of the few things in this world that is unbiased in that way. That to me is the thing that's the most beautiful about my experience with graffiti was that, my crew was there was everybody. The representation was there. We're fighting so hard for representation in film and whatnot today, but that's an incredibly hard endeavor because of many reasons. And with graffiti, as much as we paint it as a bad thing, and it's, I get it, in terms of property value and whatnot. But what it's doing, what it's celebrating, is so beautiful. I mean, like, truly, truly, you're getting all kinds of different people together that are trying to share a feeling. They're trying to celebrate each other, trying to support each other. You know what I mean? Like that's at its purest. That's what makes it so beautiful.
Having your background in graffiti, growing up drawing, having these groups of friends that did it with you, and knowing that this is what you wanted to pursue from such a young age, before you did this mentoring class, what did you think your trajectory to get there was going to be? Did you have any idea?
I believe this, and now I laugh because I laugh at the fact that I believe it. But there's a real reason for it, right? There was a real reason for it. So for me, I was in a hurry, right? Like I wanted to get a job. When I actually got out of graffiti and got animation, which wasn't planned. It just kind of happened. Getting into animation, that is. I never had a feeling. I never thought that I would live past 30. How about that? I had been around enough funerals of friends and friends of friends, people around the crew and whatnot, that it wasn't unheard of for me to go to, like, several funerals in a year.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Of people that you knew. It wasn't unheard of to have friends go to jail and, them ask you to try and help them out, like with help their family out if they had one. Maybe they had a little baby or something like that. And can you help me out? Hell yeah, I'm gonna help you out. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like it didn't, it seemed like an impossible task to, really make a life for yourself. You know what I mean? Like I honestly thought that the play I was gonna give this a try, and I was gonna try and figure it out. I had no idea what to get into. Animation was not on my mind. Comic books seemed like this thing that would maybe I could do it. Maybe I could do it if I keep trying. But it's almost like if you're in the ocean and you're trying to find land, all you can do is start paddling. But at a certain point, if you don't see land, if you don't get anything to help move you forward, like see a bird or something like that, what are you going to do besides stop? And so that stop for me would have been becoming a bus driver. Because my mom and dad always said, like, hey, well, if that thing doesn't work out, you can be LA Unified is good. As long as you keep your driving record good, it'll be a good job. It'll pay you good, has benefits. That was going to be my fallback, but I never even thought that I'd make it there. I was around enough stuff that easily could have happened to me. And so now here I am, older and way past the time that I thought I was going to live with the career I never thought I was going to have, but it is drawing. It's better than drawing. It's film. And film is, to me, just the epitome of art in a lot of ways. But it is to say that, your outlook on life when you're young, I thought that I had to move fast and I couldn't take no for an answer and I had to grind. I had to survive. You know what I mean? I had to figure it out because, there was a high potential for me to die before 30. And that to me was part of the driving factor, plus me and I was a stubborn ass little kid that if you want me to do something, tell me I couldn't do it,
Mm-hmm.
to a certain degree. And so, you know, you put those two things together, and I feel like that was my superpower, so to speak, for me to get to where I am. But it just, the outlook is interesting. Like I wish I didn't have that outlook, but that is what I had. So I'm not mad at it. I laugh now because it just feels like a different life. It feels like a different person. I am a different person now than I was back then.
So, from having that perspective and that mindset when you were younger, when you were given the opportunity to intern at Warner Brothers within animation, what did it feel like and how did that opportunity come about?
Well, that came about because I lost my job at a place that I was working at, right?
Hmm.
And I was already in that mentorship with Johan and
Mm-hmm.
the crew, and he was like, "What do you think about animation?" And I said, "Yeah, I like it. What about it?" You know what I mean? Because again, I grew up in the backyard of Warner Bros. And shit. You know what I mean? Like, but at the time, I had no idea. Like, I knew animation was a job, but I didn't. You never think about it as a job when you're a kid. When he asked me that, I was like, "Yeah, I like it. What about it?" He's like, "You can work in animation." I said, "Can I? What am I going to do? I don't know what the jobs are even." And so he turned me on to, like, he was like, "I can help you with becoming a cleanup artist," which, When I got in animation, it was still 2D. 3D hadn't really started yet. It had started, but it wasn't really a viable way of making a film yet or making a TV show. It was in its founding, early stages. So, he told me that, and I said, well, sure, I'll do it because I lost my job. And if you tell me I can get a job doing that, I'm happy to do it. I'll give it a shot. What else? What do I got to lose? I want to draw for a living. That was my driving home point every night. I want to draw for a living. So he helped me put a portfolio together, and I hadn't have a job. I had a little money saved, so I just I acted like putting this portfolio together was going to be my job for 8 months or whatever it was. And I was home. I had my little art desk in my room, and I woke up at 8, showered, ate breakfast, and I was on my desk working on my stuff until 9, from 9 to about 12. And I treated it like a job from 9 to 6 every day. That's what I did, for 8 months. The only time I wouldn't do it on the day is if I went to the zoo with a couple of kids from the class to go draw animals or to go to life drawing because you needed that in your portfolio. So I put that together, and luckily I threw a bunch of portfolios around, and I got a few callbacks to do tests. Some of them were like, hell no, because I was pretty terrible. And there's two things I'm lucky about. One is this: we're talking about the boom, the post Lion King boom. The difference between now and then is that now there's a shit ton of animation schools. Where they're feeding these kids, I have no clue. But at the time, there was only a few animation schools. I believe there was only like Cal Arts and Sheridan for the most part. I'm sure I'm offending someone, but there's a couple others. But that's the only two that were really recognized. And then you also had Art Center. So there's that need for talent, and people wanted to train, people to come in because there just wasn't enough artists. Like you couldn't find it. The right time and being ready was everything again, right? Getting the portfolio together. It happened to be the boom of, and this isn't like something that happened because I planned it. It was happened because I worked at it and I said yes to something that I wasn't sure of, and I tried it, and I put in the work. I didn't half-ass it. I went all in, and it paid off for me. And I'm so glad it was Warner Brothers. I wouldn't be here if it was somewhere else, because anywhere else I would have landed would have siloed me into that cleanup role, and I probably would have been out of a job by now, or I would have to like figure some shit out. With Warner Brothers, when they hired me, they're like, hey, we're gonna pay you a little bit, it's not that much. And guess what? When I got the check, when they told me what it was gonna be, it was like double or triple of what I was making at the grocery store or wherever I was working at the time. When I started, like they just wanted to train us, and it was like not even like specific training. It was kind of like, hey, you came in, we know you applied as a cleanup artist, but we're here to train you. We need everyone across all disciplines. So whatever you want to train in, we'll train you.
Whoa.
But if you do, and it's the only thing I've ever heard of like this, really. But if you don't make it because you're trying something out of pocket, then we're not going to hire you. That's the only drawback. And I say, shit, if you're going to try, if you're going to pay me to learn, and I can learn anything I want, I'm not worried about losing a job. I'm worried about losing an opportunity to learn. So I said yes, and then they said, what do you can pick two things, or you can pick one thing to study, because the way they, Dave Masters is the guy that piloted this program, and he is awesome. Like I can't be appreciative to him and everybody else that was a part of that, because it was a small like crew, but it was, they were earnest, and they had a great plan, and I'm forever thankful. And so I went to this training program, and I said, oh, okay, what do you want to do? I said, well, I drew characters all the time. So I was pretty confident in my character ability. So I was like, oh, I want to do animation. I don't know why that equated like to being good at animation or even wanting to do animation, but it was just something like, if I'm going to learn from professionals how to do it to know if I like it or not, I'd be a fool not to do that, right? So I picked animation, and I picked layout. And the reason why I picked layout is because I was horrible at composition. I didn't draw backgrounds. I always drew characters doing shit. So like having a background, learning how to compose, I was like, I need to learn that. If I'm going to do comic books or do something else, I need to learn that. So those are the two disciplines I picked, and I'm lucky enough and fortunate enough to that both wanted me to kind of go into that each department, right? So if I had chose animation, you'd probably be having a conversation with a vastly different Louis. But I knew I always wanted to do storytelling. I always wanted to be a comic artist, so I picked layout, and I never looked back. I just think it was the right choice for me, and it worked out well. And I, do what I do, which is put in the time and try and give it the thought, and try and do right by the people giving me opportunities. And, here I am.
So you started with your internship, and then from there you moved to an official position as a layout artist. Is that correct?
Yes, as a trainee, or yeah, I think you're in the union, so they give you very specific, deliberate titles, right? Like I think I started as a layout trainee, then got to be an apprentice on Quest for Camelot.
Cool. So, not having too much experience in that in your past, what was it like to then work on an actual film and be able to hone your craft on something that was going to be released to the public someday?
It was amazing, you know, because I don't think about it as being released to the public. I didn't give a shit about all that. I just
Mm-hmm.
liked that I was drawing for a living. You know what I mean? Like the experience of going to animation was just beautiful because you're around so much art and artistry and craft. And you feel, and I felt like, you know, when I started, I was like, I fucking really didn't belong there, right? Because like there was no, I was not looking to be in animation. I didn't know I wanted to be in animation as a young man, and then get into animation, and then go like, oh, I don't know, I'm afraid I'm gonna get fired because I don't know if I belong here. I didn't have that luxury, you know what I mean? And I didn't have that outlook because, you know, I didn't think I was an imposter. I knew I was an imposter, and the reason is because I didn't go to art college for that, and I didn't have my goal wasn't to be in animation as a living. I didn't know it existed. So I always thought of it this way. I walked into a party unknowing that it was like, you know, let's just say like the Oscar party, right? It's like Vanity Fair Oscar party, which I always hear people trying to sneak in and it's really hard. That's why I never been myself. And I felt like that. Like I felt like I was in that. I found my way in and I didn't realize it until I was there. And I was like, holy shit, I need to back into a quiet corner somewhere, get my solo cup and just sip in the corner and just stay quiet, keep my head low, you know, talk to people and like not draw too much attention to myself so I can stay here because I want to, this is the place I want to be. It's the place to be for me. And so that was a big part of it, you know, for me. And when I got in, that was my feeling. So for me to keep my head low just mean that I needed to outwork everybody. I was there before everybody and I left after everybody every day of that training program. And that's not because I'm such a hard worker and I need to make it was what I felt like I had to do because I knew I was behind everybody. And the only way I can catch up was by putting time in. There was nothing besides time and hard work. And so that's what I did.
So, when the trainee program ended, what did you think was going to happen next?
I was hoping I was going to get hired. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? Like I was like, you know, everything I was doing is get a job. And I figured like, you know what? If I didn't, my feeling was always like, if I didn't try and get the most out of the opportunity, no matter how good or bad I perceived it to be, or how it was perceived in general by everybody else, it did not matter to me. That wasn't what I was there for. I was there to learn. I was there to grow. I was there to kind of get better. Warner Brothers was, you know, the training program was my foundation. So was, and I bring Quest for Camelot as a part of that. So Quest for Camelot ended. They let go of the majority of staff, right? But they had this movie called Iron Giant that they were working on. And so I had, you know, I was still finishing, you know, Quest. I was on the end of it, and they were already kind of looking at hiring people. So I had it. They were like, "Hey, you should submit your portfolio." And I was like, "Okay." You know, I was like, "Yeah, they're not gonna hire me, right?" And so I was like, "All right." Then I was like, "You know what? I want to stay here, so I'm gonna submit my portfolio." So I submitted my portfolio, and they were like, "Yeah, we want you to come on." And I went from a trainee to a was it so what's the I think it's trainee, blah blah blah, and then you're like a standard whatever layout artist, right? Like a working layout, and then there's one more step above, which is like journeyman or something like that. So on Iron Giant, they hired me. They put me as a standard layout artist. So I went from a trainee to a standard layout artist within a year, you know, which is pretty fast. Everything about it was beautiful. Like it was Brad's first feature. He was writing it. There was so much about that everyone had. There's a lot of people that had opportunity for the first time, and it was scrappy and surly. Like it was like $50 million for the movie as a whole, as a budget, versus the 100 or $200 million one we had just worked on. That was a complete mess. But it was there was so much like love and passion for artistry that Brad brought that everyone responded to. People were just hungry for it. People are always hungry for that kind of passion. That's why we like characters that are like, you know, in movies and shows that are like people just are passionate about something, you know, because it's just people respond to that. We do as humans. And so again, I'm surrounded by guys that are better than me, so I'm just trying to learn from them. You know what I mean? And so like learning from those guys with Brad, with like the energy and of the crew as a whole, not just my department, not just my team, but the whole crew had this buzzing energy. You know, when you work on something that has an outpouring of love on every level, you start to saturate and take that in like a sponge. At least I did, because everyone was so passionate about it. Background painting, you know what I mean? Like you just name it. Like everyone was putting in so much love that to me was like my real education. That's what cemented me in animation more so than anything else. was that single experience, which was a very hard experience in terms of time, but it was a great experience because every time I saw those drawings, I was reminded beautifully so about why I'm here, what I want out of this. And so like I'm forever grateful to Brad and that movie and everyone I worked with on that movie because that set the table for my career.
Once you got to where you were thinking of making a transition to Pixar, did that sort of pinpoint the rest of your career into animation?
No. Once again, I had the opportunity, like because of someone I'd worked with, saying, "Hey, you should apply up here. We're up here. You'd be a good fit." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, I'll think about it." I had no inkling of leaving Burbank or LA. You know what I mean? I just was like, "Yeah, I'm happy here. All the work's here, and there's movie studios here." As a matter of fact, before I started at Pixar, I was actually working on a live action film, the live action version of Scooby Doo. It was just a fun experience because I was working with like a hero of mine named Bob Camp. Great guy and an incredible talent, and I'm sitting right by him and we're just bullshitting getting lunch every day. And while drawing Scooby Doo designs, I'm doing set designs and character designs and shit like that. And he's doing storyboards. And so I'm working with this crew of, this motley crew and on this show that's, no one's thinking it's Citizen Kane or high art, but we're all having a good time. And that's when the opportunity for Pixar comes up. And now I'm like, well, the question was, it wasn't like, is animation my staple? I'm like, am I having fun in live action?
Mm.
Do I want to learn the computer, right? Where am I going to learn more and what's going to serve me better is what I was looking at it as. And so the opportunity for Pixar was like, you know what? I am going to go on this interview. They might even like me. So why not hear what they have to say? Let's do the interview. So they fly me up and I do the interview. And I'm really thinking they're not gonna want me because guess what? They're a computer company. I don't even think I had an email then, which sounds funny now. All right. But we're also talking about like this is just after the dial-up days. And so I'm like, oh my God, how am I gonna there's nothing for me to do here, but they want to listen, they want to interview me. Great. So I go and do the interview and I don't know if you've heard about Pixar's interview process, but it's really in depth. Like they don't play around. Like they really interview you. They get like I had like 3 or 4 waves of multiple people coming in to ask me questions and interview me from the department I was going to go in, from other people, and it was great because like that didn't intimidate me. It was kind of interesting. I was like, wow, maybe they are interested, huh? It made me think that way, right? And but I still didn't think I'd get the job because I'm like they have to train me. Like I'm so computer illiterate. I'm so far behind, and technology wasn't artist friendly really then yet. So I did the interview. Again, I didn't think that, I just didn't know. I couldn't see how it was a fit. It was a good experience though. So they called me back and they're like, yeah, we want to hire you. And then it was just kind of like an opportunity that I was like, you know what? I'm not going to say no to this because I don't know how it works or what it means. I'm just going to take it and run with it and see what it yields because that's all I could do. The last thing I want to do is subvert my own opportunities. And so I just have to embrace everything and go with it if it makes sense. If it feels right.
I'm really interested to hear what your perspective of Pixar was coming from working on Iron Giant and with your love of 2D animation. What did you think about Pixar? Like what did you see what they did as at that time?
Pixar to me hasn't changed much in its perception. I mean, at the time, they'd made, what was it, 3 fantastic movies: Toy Story, Bugs Life, and Toy Story 2. And they were currently working on Monsters Inc. And they had done nothing but make 3 straight great movies in a row. Now, I was lucky to be a part of one great movie, but the other 2 movies, it's kind of like, not everyone would agree if they're good or bad. But yeah, everyone would unanimously agree that all 3 of those movies are great. Not just good, great. And so I knew that part of taking the opportunity was like, you know what, if I can work at a great studio like that and they're going to pay me to, and again, pay me to learn, the computer to do CG or 3D layout, if they hire me, if they say yes, I'd be a fool not to go because everything was going computers anyway, right?
Yeah.
2D was getting left in the dust. And when I got to Pixar already knew they made 3 good movies. What is it about them? So I did that interview and I didn't think I was gonna get hired. I go up there, right? And it is so foreign from everything I know in terms of culture, in terms of like how people act. There was this beautiful vibe of passion and pride in the work, right? Everyone was incredibly proud to be there. So my so my red flags go up. I'm all like, oh boy, man, this is all bad. You know why? Is because I've never met like I've met nice people, but there used to be a saying like, people would tell me like, oh yeah, Pixar already? Like, how is it? Like, oh, it's really good. Of course, I loved it. It's really good. I love it. Oh, you drank the Kool-Aid too, huh? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, there's this thing that you go to Pixar, you come back a different person, and you do. But here's the thing, but for very good reason. It's kind of like, when I talk about Iron Giant, it's like that. It felt like that when I started. It was like this place where there was just people that were so passionate, and they weren't just trying to make movies. They were trying to make great film. And there's a vastly different vibe than just trying to make something. When I was there and I just was, everyone was really nice. And the funny thing was that the reason why it was such a culture shock is because, in Hollywood, there's a little bit of like, it's a little bit of hustle and bustle in business. People will step on your back to get to where they want sometimes. And it's not everybody, but it happens a lot. When I went to Pixar, I was looking for that. I was searching for that and I wasn't finding it. So it made me really suspicious because I just thought, wow, they are really great up here at hiding that. And I don't like that. And so it took me a little while to realize, wow, like people, like if I ask anybody, if I could ask someone from rendering, which is so foreign to what I know, hey, would you mind getting lunch and just kind of teaching me about what you do and what it means? And they'd be like, sure, tomorrow. And I'm like, sure. You know what I mean? Because at Warner Bros., I was always one. Again, like I would hustle up information. So if I ever got the opportunity to talk to someone whose art I liked for whatever reason, I'd invite them to lunch and say, I'll buy. And I'm here, I'm a trainee, and I'm buying a dude that makes quadruple, if not more, my salary. And they're totally letting me buy him lunch, which I think is funny now because I would never let a youngster who wanted to take me out to lunch do that because I know they're scraping by pennies. So I would buy it, but they let me. But here's the thing: is like the trade was is that they gave me a lot of insight to the business that I couldn't get, and they gave me experience, they give me their playbook. Pixar was like filled with a bunch of people like that. Not everyone was like that, but everyone I kind of experienced was more or less like that. Everyone just cared about the project. Everyone was happy to be there. That we were all trying to make great stuff, and that to me was intoxicating. That's when I realized that was like shit. I don't want to go anywhere. And I remember I went up there with the idea of like, hey, if I make it 5 years, because I'm a super optimist, if you couldn't tell, if I make it 5 years, at least I'll been able to put that on my resume, and I learned some 3D, and I can parlay that into something in Hollywood again.
Hmm.
5 years came and went. I was like, shit. Okay, well, let's just go with the 5 year plan again. 10 years came now, and now it's 10 years, and I'm like, shit, 10 years is a long time anywhere. I'm like, and now what do I do? Well, let's roll for five more and see what happens. And that was a crucial time, but it was just interesting how fast it went. And I started at Pixar, and I started doing 3D layout, learning on the job on Monsters Inc. And I was so bad that I couldn't keep up with what they needed me to do because I was learning on the job. Right? I was learning Unix, which I don't know if you know Unix or Linux or any of that stuff. And that stuff was hard. I felt like my brain was peeling in half every night. But I ended up having to draw my shots so that the directors could, or at least Lee Unkrich could look at them and go like, oh yeah, yeah, let's put that one, that one, that one, and that one. And then I would go ahead and I would thumbnail out my shots to Lee, pitch them to him, go like, I'm thinking these shots, and he'd be like, cool, but give me one more shot like this. I would draw it, and he'd be like, yeah. Then I'd go back, and all my time would be spent on making those shots so they can kind of get in front of him one more time. So I had to adjust my approach so I could help the show essentially and maintain a job. But it was such a great learning experience. You know what I mean? Like I'm so glad, even though I don't ever want to do 3D layout again, I was so glad to have had the experience. That was all great stuff. That was all good because it was opportunity to kind of understand how the department works, but I didn't have to like silo myself in there. I've always loved that my career was always getting thrown in the deep end and having to figure out how to get back to shore, you know? Because, getting animation was essentially that. I got thrown in the deep end. I had to figure that shit out real quick. When I got into storyboarding, it's kind of the same thing. When I got into After Effects doing animatics on Incredibles, same thing. When I got into 3D layout, same thing. You know what I mean? When I did some art, there as well, same thing. It was always like trying to figure it out. Directing, same thing. Like it's never like it's kind of fun to have like these moments in your life where you start feeling comfortable, like you can throw yourself in the deep end and go like, shit, okay, I have to get back. It's a practice that I love because I think it keeps me alert, sharp, interested. It also pushes me to remind me why and why it's so hard. It's such a good way to refresh yourself, to keep yourself in check a little bit.
Absolutely. So, when you were just starting out and finally getting into the groove of everything, did you feel like you were able to sort of get some mentorship from everyone else that was there?
Yeah, I mean that's what I was saying. Like everybody was completely willing to share.
That's so awesome. I mean, it's just, I hate that that's not the everyday of business and, I mean, animation, design, anything like that. Because, I mean, really, honestly, the best work is when you're working with everybody around you and sort of building up everybody. So, I mean, it's really cool to hear that Pixar is actually like that.
Yeah, I mean it's a pretty. I mean it's special. It
Mm-hmm.
really is. And now I sound like I drank the Kool-Aid, but I mean, like real talk, I would say it if it wasn't. I'm not
Yeah.
my I have a lot to be thankful for because of Pixar and because of my ride in general is one I'm really incredibly thankful for in terms of, being in animation, that career I've carved out for myself. But I have to say, working at a few places, I do know that Pixar is a special place. What they've cultivated there, it goes beyond just artistry. Like what they strive to do on a daily basis is, respectable, and it's not perfect. It's not for everybody. To be honest, it's not. But I mean, I just appreciate so much, like I think I'm a better person because of that place. Like because ultimately it kind of I had to move, so I couldn't be around my old friends and old habits that I had to die and change with this new set of people that I'm around, right? Like we talked about, like I said earlier, it's like what you surround yourself with is what you become a little bit. So I surround, by accident, actually, I surrounded myself by a bunch of people that really cared about film and cared about animation and cared about how great the film is. Not how good it is, but how great it should be. And the push towards perfection and the fight. Because in Hollywood, you don't get that. You can fight a little bit, but you can't fight a ton, I think, most of the time. Or some people don't even want to fight at all. They're just happy to be there. And Pixar fought every film to make it great. And yes, they had a collection of great, talent at the helm, you know what I mean? Like all the leadership and, you know, all those guys up there were great, very talented, passionate people that didn't want to accept good. They could only accept great. And so they would fight until the final minute that they had to deliver the film to make it great. Now, if that's not infectious, I don't know what is. There's nothing better than being around passionate people that are driven to make something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I 100% agree, especially because like when you're working with people on something and they think it's amazing and it's deserving of like great recognition and great work by everybody else. I mean, it makes the piece more beautiful for everyone else that's also working on it. So I think it's just contagious, the perspective of what you can create when you're working with so many people that love what they're doing. So I love to hear that your perspective on your career moving forward is kind of being thrown in the deep end with every new stage. So when you went from a layout artist at Pixar to a story artist, was it the same thing, kind of being thrown in the deep end once again?
It's a little bit funny. I feel like it's like I was dragged to the deep end until I was finally let go. My introduction into the story. So if I jump back in my career, one of the people that I love to death because I felt like they're so formative in my story career is Mark Andrews. And Mark Andrews was a great guy because he had worked in some TV animation and then on Quest for Camelot he was a story guy, and then he was also a story guy on Iron Giant. It just so happened that when I went to Pixar, he was there as the head of story on Incredibles.
Oh, wow.
So I finished, so I'm hanging out with him and the Incredibles crew while working on Monsters Inc. and then Nemo, and then I started doing layout on Incredibles. And Mark was like, we could use you up here if you want. It's not story, but it's, we need After Effects, And I said, shit, hell yeah, sign me up, right? I don't know what After Effects is, but I'm gonna learn it, right? And so I was able to get pulled up, and I got pulled up, and that was kind of like my introduction to story because I was officially digital story artist on Incredibles, and then I chipped in some boards and stuff for the final battle. And like when I say I got dragged down the deep end, it's because I had that softened foray, like that softened approach where it was like I'm doing After Effects, but I'm also in boards. So I'm around it, learning it, and seeing it. So I got to taste and be around good story minds and like really impressive to me cinematic storyboards that moved really well, that were just incredibly done because of Mark and everybody. And then that was it. I was like, yes, I this is exactly where I need to be. It's all the things I wanted and that I liked doing early on.
That's cool to hear that you got to dip your toes in it just a little bit before and see the whole thing in front of you to know that that's what you wanted to then pursue. But what is it about story that attracted you so much?
Story is just a place to be because just like telling a joke, you can change someone's mood. You can watch a good movie and you can really help them feel an experience, which will make them feel better or worse about where they're at. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just such an evocative, powerful tool that requires drawing, but it also requires understanding the human nature. Like there's so much study and thought that goes into telling a story. There's so much you have to juggle and understand. And so then meeting Mark and then going to, getting onto Incredibles, it was like, oh my God, it was like these little steps that finally like felt like, yeah, this was always pointing me in that direction. I get onto Ratatouille. And again, I'm supposed to do After Effects, but they were like, but we want you to do story stuff too, right? So we're gonna have you halftime. They did that. They followed through. You know what I mean? So luckily enough, like the After Effects thing started getting a little bit like, we can't keep doing After Effects. It's just we don't have time. So because of that, I think I ended up becoming a full-fledged story artist, which was scary great. You know what I mean? Because it was like hard, but obviously because it was new again, it was deep end again. Like that was Ratatouille was my true deep end. And there's a lot of personal discoveries, and again, and Ratatouille was great because I had this whole like couple years where the movie has three different directors, but I got to work with all three. And so I got to work with Jan and what that was, and I got to work with Bob Peterson, who's a beautiful human being. I just love that guy to death, and worked with him on his version. It was funny, and I hoped that was going to go, and it didn't go. And then Brad came on, and so now I'm working with Mark, Brad, and that crew again, basically. But now I'm actually a story artist, and now I'm working with them, not just alongside them and learning. I'm actually like getting feedback from Mark and learning from Brad and everything. And it was just this. Again, once again, so Ratatouille was another experience. Incredibles wasn't. Ratatouille was the experience that was a lot like Iron Giant. You just knew how special it was while you're in it. You know what I mean? And it was just, it was like the formative experience that was like, if anything cinched me into story, it was that.
Ratatouille is my favorite Pixar movie ever, by the way, just throwing that in. So, I mean, whatever work you did on that, it was amazing.
Well, I'm sure the work you like is not what I did, but it doesn't matter. I was happy to be a part of it. That whole team was talented.
Do you remember working on that movie, what you were given and the moment that you felt like you were contributing to a story, whether it made it in the movie or not, or that you felt responsible for what this scene was going to go into or how this was going to feel, etc.? Do you remember that first moment?
I don't remember the scene, but I remember the moment, right?
Mm.
It's I think it was my first pitch, right? It was my first scene that I was pitching to Brad. And it wasn't a big scene. I think it was like a sinewy scene, right? It's one of the connective scenes that kind of go from set piece to set piece. And it was my first pitch to Brad. So I was nervous as hell. I was still new to pitching, but I was pitching to Brad. And Brad knew me, like, Brad liked my work. He liked my work on Iron Giant, so he knew me and he respected what I can do. And so now here I'm story, and he was down with it, whatever. But I wasn't sure if he was down for it. So I pitched it, and he was like, he gave me a couple notes. He's like, yeah, man, do those couple notes and send it down to edit. You know what I mean? Like, and I was like, oh shit, that's death, right? That you want to send it, like you don't really care. And so I kind of said that. I said, you sure, man? Like, what about this? And he's like, bro, it's good. It's exactly what I need. I think this is really close to what it needs. He goes, so yeah, good job. What else you want me to do? Want me to tear it up for no reason? I said, well, no, but I don't know. I thought we'd have it out a little bit more. And he's like, nah, man, it works. Good job. Now get out of here. And so I did, and I was just like, whoa, like, and it's never like that when you're pitching storyboards, at least for me. It's always like three so-so reactions, and then like you get a good one, right? So it makes it special when you do get it. But yeah, that first pitch, I'm pretty sure it was my first pitch, was one that I was like, I was expecting one thing and got another, and it was kind of nice, but it did make me feel like I was part of something, like I could do the job, and that's what I liked. Was like, oh shit, well, I was cool with it, then I could do this job, because before that I felt like I don't know if I could do it, and it wasn't because of anybody but my own self.
Wow. So, going from that first moment that you remember and having it be a pivotal moment where you could feel like you could actually do this, then moving on from a story artist to a story supervisor, how did that role change for you? And I know that was probably a pretty long transition and a lot of work put in, but when you got to that point, what did it feel like to then be sort of the supervisor on the entire story?
Well, to become a supervisor, I'd already been doing story for over 10 years. So
Hmm.
I kind of was ready for it. I was ready for it. I'd already had my experiences of both supervisor styles that I liked and I didn't quite agree with. So I was ready to kind of just see what I could do. After a while you start craving the deep water. You know what I mean? I started craving like that change, that big seismic change that makes you, cry at night. Wake up at 3 a.m. sweating, going like, "Oh my God, I'm such a fraud. How am I going to pull this off? How's it going to work? I'm gonna blow this." I was ready to see what that was, and what the beautiful thing is, what my experience taught me was that when I got there and I had my plan and I kind of had it figured out, I had an idea of how I wanted to go. It was great. It was exactly what I thought it would be, and it was better because my approach, I think, was sound. But unfortunately, like the show didn't get to go very much longer than the first screening. It's the one thing I wish I could have had, but at the same time, I was kind of happy to taste it and go like, "Oh, I could do that." Is this where I want to be? And I knew that I wanted to tell stories. So like the thing about being a supervisor that's great is that you get to work and be helpful with someone who's telling their stories. But I knew that I wanted to tell my own stories. The supervisor thing was great. I'm glad I got to taste it. It was a good time. I wish it would have went a little bit deeper, but it didn't. And you know, life gives you what it does, and you just kind of got to roll with it.
So, working on very iconic Pixar movies, like including Monsters Inc., Finding Nemo, Ratatouille, Brave, all the above, what is the process like for coming up with stories and then like having so many different people that have different sections of a story? How do you keep it cohesive? How do you carry the emotion correctly to make it come together to be this beautiful piece?
Well, every director is different, so their means to getting there is different. But I think the thing that's the same for all creative parties involved is how you approach your team. Like Brad might write everything kind of away from the team. He'll write it and kind of get ready to direct it. The thing that's the same that Brad does versus someone that utilizes their story team, like they both need the same thing in order to get to a good place. They both need iteration and they both need people that they trust to kind of hear it, get it out of their head so they can kind of understand what it's actually saying versus like when you're creating something, you keep it in your head. Like what you want it to say and it's easy to mix up what you want it to say with what it's actually saying. And so the iterative process and sharing it with people that you trust is, that you trust their opinion. Like I said, this is a team sport. I don't care if you write it by yourself, you still bring people in at a certain point to see it, to kind of get eyes on it and get an opinion on it. And if you do that once, you're better off. If you do it twice, you're even better off. If you do it 20 times, you're going to be great because you're going to spin it and whittle away and find the stuff that are real gems. You know what I mean? Because you can only make something as good as your understanding of the subject, or your understanding of story. So, between having having hands there to help keep the plate spinning and having iteration, like really utilizing your team in iteration, you can't keep it locked up in the ivory tower that is your head because it's always misleading. So you get it out and you trust people to help you with maintaining its North Star, right? Maintaining the direction because I feel like directors, when they have a good idea of what they're going for, they may not be able to verbalize it all the time, but if you really listen, you start to pick up on the things that they keep repeating, whether they know it or not.
I've never heard it put in such a way that described it so perfectly, as in it has to be spread to other people for it to come to fruition the way that you actually want it to. I think you described that perfectly.
Well, because think of it this way, movies are like a relay race, right? And everyone's handing the baton to the next one as it goes down the line. So if you don't subscribe to a team effort, you're going to have a hard time in a relay race, right? This is my experience in terms of what I've seen in film. Film is a team sport.
So, you pretty recently became a Spark short director. How has that role been different from what you've done before, if at all?
Oh, oh, it's incredibly different. I mean, I can't tell you much about the short because it hasn't come out yet, and we don't know when it's going to come out for
Of
sure.
course,
But
that's fine.
so I've had three experiences exactly with knowing what the situation I was in at the time and being able to be present in a great way. Incredibles, Ratatouille, and now my short. My short was it was probably the scariest thing I've ever done because I had to own it. I could no longer sit back and be a armchair quarterback. I couldn't sit back and be a backseat driver and say, "Oh, I would have made a left there." Oh, you gonna make a right here? Oh, I guess so. I had to walk the walk, and believe me, I was ready. But you're never ready. You're never ready to be on the stage. You're never ready to own your own shit. You're never ready to be vulnerable with people you don't know. And you kind of have to do all those things to get something to be decent, I think. Like, I think my short is good in that I love what my team did. I love my team. I love how we worked. The day to day could be very tedious and hard, when you don't agree, but I think they were all champs with how we worked together. I think we made something really good. But the feeling of making something and what you actually have, it's hard to say. Like, I don't know how audience is going to receive it, and I don't know how even the people at work that haven't seen it are going to receive it. It's a scary thing, because of course, you don't make anything expecting it to be bad. You want your one little piece of art to have everyone in the world, all enemies, joining hands and and loving each other. It's so special. You want it to mean something, and I think the scariest thing is if it doesn't mean anything, you know, because you're really vulnerable. Because for me, I'm not just entertaining. I'm not just going like this is a cool robot that smashes through stuff, on this journey to save a little kid. It's kind of like, it's just like, did I find something honest? Can people relate to it? Does this mean anything to anybody else? Am I talking to myself? So my short hasn't come out, so I'm in that stage of like I'm the only one that sucks, like, and I don't feel that way. I
Of
truly I
course.
don't. But I mean, there is that element of like I just don't know what it's gonna mean to people. But I always subscribe to the idea that this is my first real venture, my first real effort. I think it's a good one. I'm hoping that it earns me the right to make another one because people got to fund it. So you got to make sure that people feel like it's good enough that they want to pay you to make another one. And so I'm hoping that it does that. And, I think it's really special to me because it's just the whole Spark program at Pixar is just a special thing where they give people an opportunity to make something, whatever it is you want. And there's no oversight. You pretty much run it all and you use the resources at Pixar, which are the beautiful people that are there and the facilities that are there. And I had a lot of support, man. I couldn't tell you how touched I was when they announced that I was making a Spark. It was two of us, Afton Corbin and myself, and they announced our names and people just blew up,
Aw.
and it was so touching. Like I'm not one for crying too much, but that was one time I almost thought I was gonna cry in front of everybody. I mean, I was really like touched because you expect your friends to cheer for you, but when you got people like cheering like that, and you don't really know them that well, but they're just happy because they have an idea of you and they want you to succeed. There is nothing like that. And that was something that was very special. Like I knew that was gonna be special from the moment that happened because I was like, wow, this is a whole different place, and people believe in me more so than I think maybe I even believe in myself at times. And so to have that opportunity to kind of do it there was extremely scary and extremely gratifying and beautiful because it was just the whole experience of making the short during COVID, especially, it was a place that we can all get together and be passionate about film and what we're trying to do. And it feels like we're making it at home in our garage because we weren't at the studio. And it was this beautiful moment where it was just us in the short. And what I experienced in the short was so much more than telling a story. It was so much about learning about myself and my connection to certain things. It was so much about how I like to work as a team, how much I value the people that work with me towards a goal, and what that means to them and me. That's what's beautiful.
Wow. I think it's so cool to see where you started and how your drive for wanting to do stories and drawing kind of carried you through your entire career so far. But seeing it all culminate in the ability to make a short and make it your story, but learn so much in the process of working with others and working with such a great team throughout your career, you've been so amazing at taking all the opportunities that have come your way without really thinking too much about it because you know it's a good opportunity. And I think that just reflects so well on the goals that you still have today. So, I do have a couple questions that I like to ask everybody that comes on the podcast. So, the first one is if you could try any profession other than your current one and you didn't have to worry about school or money or anything like that, what would you like to try?
You know what? I think I would like to do if I had time. I would love to like either study in Mexico, like Mesoamerican, culture, like work in a museum basically, or like work in that kind of aspect of like learning about cultures that have come before us, whether it's in Mexico or even in America. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I'm super fascinated in indigenous culture across the board, and it doesn't have to even just be there. That's where I would start. One of the things that I love in storytelling, or one of the things I love that drives me is just shared, the human experience and the shared aspects that the things that we share as human beings, culture aside, race and gender aside, there's culturally things that are just shared, because we're human beings first. And so like I would want to do more research into like that aspect in terms of how it actually is played out in the past. You know what I mean? Like what the connections are by actually studying it.
Wow, you're very philosophical in your answers, and I think that's really cool. But I know you weren't saying that to be deep or anything, but I mean, it's really interesting to think about how you answer your questions, and I think that was a really cool response. My last question is, do you have any advice on turning your passions into a career?
I would say be aware that even though it's your passion, there's so many things that come with it because it is a job. And, I think that there's a lot of information out there about being just smart about your career. Believe me, like I talked about earlier, like I love that I'm drawing for a living. But just to be honest, I'm at a point in my career where drawing is getting harder for me. And I don't mean that drawing is hard. I mean that my body and my hands are actually kind of like I can't put the same grueling amount of time in drawing that I used to. So I have to work smarter, you know what I mean? And try and keep in mind the future. Have goals for the things that you want to get out of everything. Know what you're getting out of the jobs you pick and why you're doing them. Have agency of yourself. Don't wait for someone else. Don't look for someone else to tell you the answers. But guess what? No one can tell you about you. Being an artist is learning about yourself. It's a lot of deep diving and hard nights and, dark nights of the soul where you're just sitting there drawing or working on a project and you're like, my God, why did I pick this? Why am I here at 3 a.m. trying to crunch out something that I don't believe in or I do, but I'm just tired and I just don't really want to do it right now. Like those are real questions. And, I think having a reason why you're there kind of helps that, right? Like know what you want out of it and try your hardest. And this is really hard, but try your hardest not to measure what your success is by somebody else's success. Because that becomes very easy. And that's, when you start bringing those kind of negative outlooks on what your career is supposed to be or should be, it really stops you from moving forward. So you have to be on point with what you want, and even if you don't know exactly, just have a small goal and allow it to grow. Just keep in mind that, you're doing this out of love and it's nice to make your love or your passion a career, but it's still a job. Whether you're directing, whether you're, storyboarding, whether you're whatever you're doing in it, you're getting paid to perform a service. So just have an idea about what you want. And if it's just to pay the bills, then that's all right. You can deal with that. And mentally, it doesn't feel like it's such a terrible thing if that's what you're doing because you're clear with yourself. So you kind of have to have a system in place, a plan in place about that will keep you healthy and keep you moving forward and keep you driven to grow, not ambiguously, but rather like, what is this? What am I drawing towards? What is this small project? What is this big project? What am I trying to do? How am I developing myself? And, like having that goal to try and find that is everything. And it starts with yourself and having the goals for yourself and having an idea about how you want to run things and allowing it to progress and change and grow. Nothing that we do in this life keeps us still. It's always about, like, oh shit, I got it. I got to the, to the top of Mount Everest, and you look up and there's a bigger Mount Everest every time.
You make a great point to really look into your future past reaching that goal and considering what life is beyond reaching your passion as a career and continuing that upward slope even past that ultimate goal, because I think a lot of people, they set their sights on just getting there and don't put a lot of thought into, could be the majority of your life past that, and everything that you need to continue putting into it. So and that's a great point, and something very important to consider for sure.
Yeah, I mean, they say that everyone has a plan when they get into the ring until they get hit in the face. And then that plan changes, right? And I feel like life is the same way, where it's just like having a plan is one thing, but it's allowing yourself to adjust with the results of what you try to get to in that plan is where it really matters. I want to do this, but I have to be ready to like allow it to change or adjust or morph in the way that it's going to naturally, because you can't control how things work in life, obviously. But we get so one-track minded with our goals that sometimes we forget that, or I forget that. So I think it's really important to just remind myself, like, yeah, I'm going to have a plan, but I'm going to get hit in the face by life, and I have to be ready for it so I can just roll with it. But it's always about chipping away and not about winning in one fell swoop.
Well, yeah, that's a great point. And given your entire career history, I mean, it just sums up that you've really moved with all of your experiences and adjusted to get to where you are. So, and that's a great metaphor for your career in general.
That's pretty good. I didn't think about that.
Well, Louis, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It was really wonderful to speak with you.
Well, thank you for that, Ashley. I'm glad. I appreciate the therapy. All right, Ashley, I really do.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Louis, links are in the description down below. If you like the show, please leave a rating, subscribe, and comment on whatever platform you listen on. It really helps out the show. For more information or to submit your own questions for future guests, you can find us on Instagram at The More Creative or on YouTube at The More Creative Podcast. Again, thanks for listening, and I hope to see you next time.